The grand chamber of the Valtharian Confederacy was a monument to stillness, a cavern of polished obsidian and living crystal that pulsed with the faint, rhythmic light of a captive nebula. Here, silence was not an absence of sound, but a presence, a weight that pressed upon the delegates assembled on the tiered platforms encircling the central lumen. The air itself, a carefully synthesized mixture of atmospheric gases from a dozen worlds, seemed to hold its breath. At the chamber's heart, a shimmering holographic sphere depicted the contested star system, a swirl of celestial dust and nascent suns, where the conflict had begun. But the focus of every mind, the source of the crushing silence, was not the territory. It was the new players who had entered the grand, cosmic game, the beings who called themselves human. From his elevated dais, High Counselor Thrax of the Valtharian Ascendancy surveyed the assembly. His multifaceted eyes, capable of perceiving spectra beyond the comprehension of most sentient life, saw not just the physical forms of the delegates, but the shimmering auras of their anxieties. The proud, insected Cathar, their carapaces twitching with repressed aggression, the gelatinous, telepathic Olo, their translucent bodies swirling with troubled thoughts, the silicon-based crystalline silicates of the Onyx cluster, whose slow, deliberate energy fields now resonated with a discordant hum. They were all united in a state of profound and unsettling confusion. The war against the marauding Zephyrin hegemony, a brutal expansionist empire built on conquest, had been a grueling affair of attrition, a predictable if bloody calculus of fleet strengths and logistical lines. Then the humans had arrived. They had been discovered on a small, lush world orbiting a common yellow star, a world the Confederacy had designated for observation, deemed too primitive for formal contact. The Zephyrin, in their relentless advance, had seen the planet as nothing more than a resource-rich stepping stone. The Confederacy, bound by its own non-interference doctrines and stretched thin across a vast front, had offered what little aid it could without direct intervention. They had gifted the humans access to basic hyperlane charts, rudimentary shield schematics, and a wealth of decommissioned stellar-class ship hulls, the discarded scrap of a dozen older conflicts. It was a gesture of pity, an offering to a fledgling race about to be extinguished. The expectation was that they would flee, that their primitive world would fall, and that the Confederacy would note their passing with a formal, cosmic eulogy. The humans, however, had not fled. They had taken the scrap, and they had gone to war. The initial reports had been dismissed as censor ghosts, as Zephyrin disinformation. Fleets of mismatched, asymmetrical vessels, cobbled together from the Confederacy's discarded junk, engaging Zephyrin battle groups. These human ships were abominations of engineering, a chaotic amalgamation of different technologies, barely spaceworthy by Confederacy standards. They lacked the elegant, sweeping lines of Valtharian cruisers, the brutal functionality of Cathar dreadnoughts. They were, by all accounts, flying heaps of refuse. Yet they were not just fighting, they were winning. The holographic sphere in the chamber's center shifted, displaying combat recordings. The delegates watched in stunned silence as a human vessel, a grotesque fusion of a retired Valtharian freighter and what appeared to be a hollowed-out asteroid, weathered a full barrage from a Zephyrin destroyer. The alien weapon fire, beams of coherent energy that should have sliced through the patchwork hull, simply splashed. The energy dissipated across the ship's surface in shimmering, chaotic patterns, absorbed by a shielding system that defied every known principle of energy physics. "It is illogical," hissed the Cathar delegate, his mandibles clicking in agitation. His voice was a dry, rasping sound that echoed in the chamber's profound quiet. "Their technology is a generation behind even the most primitive of our client races. The materials they use are crude, unrefined. We have analyzed the debris from their destroyed ships. It is scrap, nothing more. Yet it performs in ways our most advanced simulations cannot replicate. How do they absorb such energy? How do their primitive reactors power such systems?" An Olo delegate, its formless body undulating gently, projected its thoughts into the minds of the assembled. It is not their technology that is the primary anomaly. It is their strategy. They fight without precedent, without honor, without the established doctrines of interstellar warfare. They do not meet fleets in glorious formations. They use asteroids as weapons, they ignite gas giants, they turn nebula clouds into plasma traps. They treat the battlefield not as a dueling ground, but as a physics problem to be solved, and they use the very laws of the Uni. Versus their weapons, it is unnerving. High Counselor Thrax shifted his immense form, the crystals on his ceremonial armor chiming softly. He had spent cycles reviewing the human data, his mind, accustomed to the elegant certainties of Valtharian logic, struggling to find a pattern. The humans were a paradox. Their communications were calm, almost detached, even in the heat of battle. They spoke of probabilities, of resource allocation, of acceptable losses, with a chilling pragmatism that bordered on the robotic. Yet their actions in defense of their home world had been ferociously passionate. They had sacrificed entire fleets of their scrap-built ships to protect civilian evacuation routes, their pilots staying at their posts until their vessels were consumed by plasma. It was this duality that haunted him, the cold, calculating strategist and the fiercely protective guardian existing within the same species. "They have pushed the Zephyrin back from their home system," Thrax said, his voice a low, resonant hum that filled the chamber. "And they have not stopped there. They are now actively prosecuting the war in the adjacent sectors with the scrap we gave them. They have taken our discarded tools and forged them into weapons that outperform our own." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle upon the delegates. The silence that followed was heavier than before, thick with a dawning, uncomfortable truth. The Confederacy, in its arrogance, had not simply underestimated the humans. They had fundamentally misunderstood the nature of the universe itself. The Confederacy's understanding of technology was linear, a ladder of progress where each new discovery built upon the last. Their science was a pristine temple of established laws and proven theories. The humans, it seemed, had approached science not as a temple, but as a chaotic workshop. They appeared to see the laws of physics not as immutable rules, but as a set of ingredients to be mixed and matched in novel, often dangerous, combinations. Their shields, it was later discovered, were not a single, coherent field, but a layered, chaotic mesh of multiple, overlapping, and often conflicting energy frequencies. It was an engineering nightmare, a system that should have torn itself apart from internal resonance stress. But it worked. The sheer unpredictability of the field made it almost impossible to penetrate with conventional energy weapons. It was like trying to punch a storm. Their propulsion systems were equally confounding. They had taken the basic hyperdrive schematics and corrupted them. That was the only word the Valtharian engineers could use. Instead of generating a stable, controlled wormhole, the human drive seemed to tear a ragged, screaming hole in the fabric of space-time, a brutal, uncontrolled rupture that should have vaporized the ship and everything around it. Yet their ships not only survived these transits, but emerged from them with a terrifying lack of predictability. They could appear in the middle of a Zephyrin formation, on the far side of a star, or even in one recorded instance, within the upper atmosphere of a gas giant. The Zephyrin, whose tactics relied on precise calculations and predictable fleet movements, were being systematically dismantled by an enemy who treated the battlefield like a canvas for chaos. A new holographic display lit up the chamber, this one showing a diplomatic channel that had been opened. It was a formal request from the human government, or what passed for it. They called themselves the Terran Alliance. The request was simple and delivered with the same unnerving calm that characterized their military communications. They wished to formalize their relationship with the Valtharian Confederacy. They were not asking for more aid. They were not demanding to be recognized as a major power. They were proposing a mutual exchange of information. They wanted to understand the Confederacy's philosophies, its history, its art. In return, they offered to share everything they had learned about the Zephyrin. The silicate delegate, a towering crystalline form that communicated through harmonic vibrations, resonated its thoughts through the chamber floor. "A trap. They seek to lull us into a false sense of security, to learn our weaknesses. They are primitives who have stumbled upon a dangerous new form of warfare. They are unpredictable, and therefore they are a threat." Or the Olo projected, its thoughts a gentle counterpoint. "They are precisely what they appear to be. A young race, thrust into a conflict they did not seek, using the tools at their disposal in the only way they know how. Perhaps their logic is not flawed, but simply different. They see the universe not as a set of rules to be obeyed, but as a system to be understood and manipulated. Is that not the very definition of progress?" High Counselor Thrax considered this. He looked at the image of the human ambassador, a still-frame take. And from their initial communication, the being was small, soft-skinned, with binocular vision and a remarkably symmetrical face. It displayed no overt signs of aggression, no bared fangs or sharpened claws. Its expression was one of placid neutrality. Yet behind that calm facade was a mind that had conceived of weaponizing a black hole's accretion disk, a species that had turned a junkyard into a fleet that was humbling an empire. "We have underestimated them," Thrax rumbled, his voice echoing with finality. We have judged them by our own standards, by our own understanding of what is possible, and we have been found wanting. We sent them to war with our scrap, believing they would be little more than a momentary distraction. Now we must consider the possibility that we are the ones who are obsolete." He raised one of his 4 powerful arms and gestured to the holographic sphere. "Accept their proposal. Open a dialogue. I will meet with their ambassador myself. It is time we learned who these humans truly are." The chamber remained silent, the delegates lost in their own troubled thoughts, the light of the captive nebula casting long, dancing shadows across the faces of beings who had just realized they were no longer the most advanced civilization in the galaxy. The universe, it seemed, had a terrifying new sense of humor, and humanity was its punchline. The silence in the grand chamber was finally broken not by a delegate's voice, but by a chime, soft yet insistent, indicating an incoming transmission of the highest priority. On the central holographic sphere, the image of the human ambassador was replaced by a live feed from the Valtharian flagship, the Stellaris, currently positioned in a neutral sector near the edge of human-controlled space. The face that appeared was not Valtharian, but human. It was the same individual from the still image, but now there was a subtle depth, a quiet intensity in the being's dark eyes that the static picture had failed to capture. The human identified himself as Ambassador Kalen. He spoke the Valtharian trade language with a flawless, unaccented fluency that was in itself unsettling. There was no synthetic rasp of a translation device, no hesitant pauses. He spoke as if the complex, multitonal language was his native tongue. The delegates watched, their auras a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. This was the representative of the species that built warships from garbage, that fought with a terrifying, chaotic brilliance. Yet his demeanor was one of utter and complete serenity. "High Counselor Thrax," the ambassador began, his voice calm and measured, a stark contrast to the charged atmosphere in the chamber. "I thank you for agreeing to this meeting. We of the Terran Alliance believe that understanding must precede cooperation. We have much to learn from the venerable civilizations of the Valtharian Confederacy." Thrax, his own voice a deep baritone that usually commanded immediate deference, found himself momentarily at a loss. The human's tone was not that of a supplicant, nor of a boastful conqueror. It was the tone of an equal, a peer, and it was a tone no one in this chamber had ever heard from a newly contacted species. "Ambassador Kalen," Thrax began, choosing his words with care, "your people have demonstrated a unique aptitude for warfare. An aptitude that has taken the Confederacy and the Zephyrin hegemony by surprise. Your methods are unorthodox." A faint, almost imperceptible expression crossed the ambassador's face. It was not a smile, not in the Valtharian sense, but a slight softening of the muscles around his eyes and mouth. "High Counselor, we did not choose this war. It was brought to our doorstep. We have simply adapted to the circumstances, using the resources available to us. You call our methods unorthodox. We call them necessary." The Cathar delegate, unable to contain his agitation, activated his own comms channel. "Necessary," he rasped, his voice dripping with contempt. "You desecrate the very art of combat. There is no honor in your tactics, no glory. You turn stars into weapons, you collapse subspace corridors. This is not war, it is cosmic vandalism." Ambassador Kalen turned his gaze to the Cathar delegate's image on his screen. His expression did not change. His calm was a fortress, impenetrable and absolute. "Honor," he said, his voice quiet yet carrying an immense weight, "is a luxury of the secure. Glory is a solace for the dead. The Terran Alliance is not interested in either. Our only objective is the preservation of our species and the cessation of hostilities. We fight not for glory, but for peace. A peace the Zephyrin hegemony seems determined to deny us." The chamber fell silent again. The human's words, simple and direct, had cut through the Cathar's bluster like a surgeon's scalpel. He had not argued, he had not debated. He had simply stated a truth so fundamental, so self-evident that it left no room for rebuttal. The Confederacy, with its millennia of tradition and its rigid codes of conduct, had forgotten the primal, underlying purpose of conflict: to end it. "They are philosophers," the Olo delegate projected, its thoughts tinged with a newfound awe. "They are warrior philosophers. Their logic is not different. It is deeper. They have stripped away the rituals, the traditions, the self-deceptions, and they see war for what it truly is, a failure of understanding." Thrax felt a tremor of something he had not experienced in centuries: respect. A deep, profound respect for this small, soft-skinned being and the species it represented. "You speak of peace," Thrax said, his voice losing some of its earlier formality. "Yet your actions have been aggressive, expansionist. You have not only defended your territory, you have taken the war to the Zephyrin. We have learned, Ambassador Kalin replied, that a passive defense is a slow death. To achieve peace, one must be willing to dismantle the instruments of war. The Zephyrin hegemony is an instrument of war. It is a system built on conquest and subjugation. It cannot be reasoned with, it cannot be appeased, it must be disassembled. He spoke the last word with no malice, no hatred. It was a statement of fact, a conclusion reached through cold, hard logic. The Zephyrin were not an enemy to be hated. They were a problem to be solved. The human ambassador then did something that sent a wave of shock through the Grand Chamber. He opened a secure data channel, transmitting a massive file directly to the Confederacy's central archives. It was not encrypted. It was not protected. It was an open gift. This, Kalin explained, is everything we know about the Zephyrin, their fleet deployments, their supply lines, their command structure, their genetic makeup, their psychological profiles. We have been studying them. Thrax watched as his data analysts began to process the information. Their auras flared with astonishment. The depth of the human intelligence was staggering. They had not just been fighting the Zephyrin, they had been dissecting them, layer by layer, with a methodical precision that was both brilliant and terrifying. They had mapped the Zephyrin genome, deciphered their communication codes, even analyzed their art and literature to understand their way of thinking. They knew the Zephyrin better than the Zephyrin knew themselves. And this, Kalin continued, his calm demeanor unwavering, is for you. Another data file streamed across the interstellar void. This one contained the complete schematics for their chaotic, multi-layered shielding system, the scrap shields, as the Confederacy had derisively called them. The file included the underlying mathematical principles, the exotic matter equations, the quantum mechanical models. It was a scientific revolution, gifted freely, without condition. The silicate delegate vibrated with a frequency of pure disbelief. Why would you give us this? This is your greatest advantage. To share it is to surrender it. Ambassador Kalin's gaze shifted to the crystalline being. Because our goal is not advantage. It is the end of the war. Your fleets are numerous, your ships are powerful, but you are fighting a conventional war against an unconventional enemy. Your losses are unsustainable. Our shielding technology will save countless Valtharian lives. The preservation of life, any sentient life, is a goal that transcends strategic advantage. We do not wish to rule the battlefield, we wish to end it. The full weight of the human philosophy descended upon the chamber. They were not conquerors. They were not savages. They were guardians. They fought with a brutal, terrifying efficiency, but their ultimate goal was not dominion but preservation. They were willing to share their most revolutionary discoveries, to sacrifice their own strategic edge if it meant a quicker end to the conflict and the saving of lives, even alien lives. They were a species that had looked into the abyss of interstellar war and had not flinched, but had instead sought to understand it, to deconstruct it, and ultimately to transcend it. High Counselor Thrax, for the first time, felt a sense of hope. The war with the Zephyrin had seemed like an endless, grinding cycle of violence. But now there was a new element in the equation, a new way of thinking, a species that did not see the universe as a hierarchy of power but as a community of life. Ambassador Kalin, Thrax said, his voice filled with a newfound reverence. The Valtharian Confederacy accepts your gift, and we would be honored to learn from you. The human ambassador gave a slight, formal nod. The honor is ours, High Counselor. We believe this is the beginning of a long and fruitful relationship. There is much we can learn from each other. The universe is a vast and wondrous place, full of mysteries. It would be a tragedy to fill it with nothing but the echoes of our war. His words hung in the air, a simple, profound truth that resonated deeper than any battle cry ever could. The great reveal was not a weapon, not a secret technology. It was a philosophy, an ethic so profoundly logical and compassionate that it had the power to reshape the galaxy. The humans had not come to conquer, they had come to teach. And the first lesson was that the greatest power in the universe was not a weapon, but an idea. The idea that all life is precious, and that the only war worth fighting is the war against ignorance and hatred. The Valtharian Confederacy, a civilization that had prided itself on its wisdom and enlightenment, suddenly felt like a child, listening to the words of an ancient, impossibly wise elder. The age of the Confederacy was over. The age of the Alliance had just begun. The weeks that followed were a period of unprecedented change. The Confederacy, humbled and intrigued, embraced the human offerings with a cautious eagerness. Valtharian engineers, working alongside human scientists via remote communion, began the arduous process of retrofitting their fleets with the new shielding technology. It was a frustrating, counterintuitive process. The Valtharian mind, accustomed to order, precision, and elegant design, recoiled from the chaotic, almost organic nature of the human systems. The shields were not built. They were grown. Layer upon layer of conflicting energy fields woven together in a pattern that seemed to defy all known laws of physics, yet held together by a complex underlying mathematical framework that was more akin to a musical composition than an engineering blueprint. The Olo, with their telepathic abilities, were the first to truly grasp the human philosophy. They communed directly with human diplomats and thinkers, their shared consciousness a swirling sea of ideas and concepts. The Olo came to understand that human logic was not cold and detached, but deeply rooted in empathy. Their pragmatism was not a lack of emotion, but a product of it. They had seen the horrors of their own history, the terrible cost of unchecked aggression and tribalism, and they had made a conscious, collective decision to rise above it. They had weaponized logic and reason not for conquest, but for the protection of the very emotions that drove them. Compassion, love, the fierce, unyielding desire to protect their own, and by extension, all sentient life. Cathar, a species for whom martial prowess and honor were the cornerstones of their civilization, had the most difficult time adapting. They saw the human approach to warfare as cowardly, a dishonorable refusal to meet the enemy face to face. But as the tide of the war began to turn, as Valtharian ships equipped with human shields began to survive encounters that would have previously been suicidal, even the most hardened Cathar warriors began to grudgingly admit the effectiveness of the human methods. They watched holovids of human pilots executing impossible maneuvers, using their chaotic drives to outwit and outmaneuver entire Zephyrin squadrons. They saw the cold, detached fury with which the humans prosecuted the war, a fury born not of hatred, but of a grim, sorrowful necessity. They were not fighting for glory. They were performing a painful, cosmic surgery, excising a cancer from the galaxy. High Counselor Thrax and Ambassador Kalen met frequently, their conversations spanning philosophy, science, art, and the very nature of existence. Thrax learned of human history, a turbulent, violent saga of self-inflicted wounds and astonishing resilience. He learned of their art, a dizzying array of forms and styles that reflected their complex, contradictory nature. He learned of their capacity for great love and great cruelty, for breathtaking creativity and devastating self-destruction. And he began to understand. The humans were not a paradox. They were a symphony, a species that had embraced all aspects of their being, the light and the dark, and had forged them into a coherent, if complex, whole. The turning point in the war came in the Battle of the Crimson Nebula. The Zephyrin, desperate to regain the initiative, had amassed a massive fleet, their largest ever assembled, and had launched a surprise attack on the Confederacy's primary shipbuilding facility. It was a brilliant, audacious move that should have crippled the Confederacy's war effort, but the humans had anticipated it. Their deep analysis of Zephyrin psychology had predicted that their enemy, when cornered, would resort to a single, overwhelming show of force. The Terran Alliance, in conjunction with the newly retrofitted Confederacy fleet, was waiting for them. The battle was not a glorious clash of arms. It was a slaughter. The Zephyrin fleet, emerging from hyperspace, found itself not in open space, but in a carefully prepared trap. The humans had used their chaotic drives to tow dozens of small asteroids, each fitted with a powerful kinetic charge. Into the nebula. At the precise moment the Zephyrin fleet arrived, the charges were detonated, creating a cascading shockwave of plasma and debris that ripped through the enemy formation. The Zephyrin shields, designed to repel coherent energy beams, were useless against the sheer, brutal force of the kinetic impact. The Confederacy fleet, protected by their new human-designed shields, then moved in, their weapons tearing into the crippled, disorganized Zephyrin ships. The battle was over in hours. The Zephyrin hegemony's grand armada, the pride of their empire, was reduced to a field of drifting, silent wreckage. The war was not yet over, but its outcome was no longer in doubt. The Zephyrin, broken and demoralized, were in full retreat. In the aftermath of the victory, a grand summit was held on the Valtharian homeworld. Delegates from every species in the Confederacy gathered to honor their new allies. Ambassador Kalen stood before them not as a conqueror but as a partner. "Today," he said, his calm voice resonating through the chamber, "we celebrate not a victory in war but a victory for peace. The Zephyrin hegemony is a broken power, but we must not make the same mistake they did. We must not replace their tyranny with our own. We offer the Zephyrin people not conquest, but a chance to rebuild, to rejoin the galactic community as a peaceful and productive member. The cycle of violence must end here, today. The assembled delegates, who had been prepared for a speech of triumph and retribution, were once again stunned into silence. The humans, who had prosecuted the war with such ruthless efficiency, were now offering their defeated enemy a hand of friendship and forgiveness. It was a gesture of such profound and unexpected magnanimity that it reshaped the political landscape of the galaxy in a single moment. The Valtharian Confederacy, the Cathar Imperium, the Olo Collective, the Silicate Shard, they all looked at the small, unassuming human ambassador and saw not a new power to be feared, but a new ideal to be emulated. High Counselor Thrax, his heart swelling with a strange and unfamiliar emotion, a mixture of awe and profound gratitude, stepped forward. "Ambassador Kalen," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you have taught us more than just how to win a war. You have taught us what it means to be truly civilized. The Valtharian Confederacy is in your debt, and we would be honored to join you, not as a client, not as an ally of convenience, but as a true partner. Let us forge a new alliance, a galactic alliance, founded on the principles you have shown us: logic, empathy, and the unwavering belief in the sanctity of all sentient life." A roar of approval, a cacophony of clicks, chimes, and telepathic projections erupted from the assembled delegates. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated hope, a new dawn for a galaxy that had known only war for so long. The human, the primitive from the forgotten little world, had not only saved them, he had united them. But as the celebrations began, as the delegates from a dozen worlds mingled in a spirit of newfound camaraderie, Ambassador Kalen and High Counselor Thrax retreated to a private chamber. The human's serene expression had been replaced by one of quiet gravity. "There is something else," Kalen said, his voice low. "Something we discovered during our analysis of the Zephyrin data, something that concerns us." He activated a holographic display. It showed a star chart, but one that was far older and more extensive than any known to the Confederacy. It depicted a vast, unexplored region of space far beyond the galactic rim, and at its center was a single repeating signal, a beacon that had been broadcasting for millions of years. "The Zephyrin discovered this signal centuries ago," Kalen explained. "Their entire expansionist philosophy, their relentless drive for conquest, was born of fear. They were not seeking to build an empire, they were trying to build a fortress." "A fortress against what?" Thrax asked, a cold dread beginning to seep into his mind. Kalen zoomed in on the signal's source. The image resolved into a colossal artificial structure, a megastructure so vast it dwarfed entire star systems. It was dark, silent, seemingly abandoned, but the signal still pulsed from its heart, a simple, repeating mathematical sequence, a warning. "We have devoted our entire computational network to deciphering the more complex layers of the signal," Kalen said. "We have only managed to translate a single fragment. A fragment that has been repeated over and over for eons." He looked at Thrax, his dark eyes filled with a chilling solemnity. "It says, 'They are coming. The silence is their shield. Do not answer.'" A profound, galaxy-spanning silence fell upon the two leaders. The war with the Zephyrin, the formation of the new galactic alliance, all of it suddenly seemed small, insignificant. They had been so focused on their conflicts, their own petty squabbles, that they had failed to see the larger truth. They were not the masters of their own destiny. They were children, playing in the shadow of a vast, ancient, and terrifying unknown. The battlefield they had just conquered was not the end of the war. It was merely the beginning. And the scrap they had used to win it would be nothing against the silent, patient, and impossibly ancient enemy that was coming for them all. The universe was larger, older, and infinitely more dangerous than they had ever imagined. And the greatest test of humanity and their newfound allies was not behind them but waiting for them in the cold, silent darkness between the galaxies. The humans had taught the galaxy how to fight, how to unite, how to hope. Now they would have to teach them how to face the ultimate fear, the fear of the unknown. And as the two leaders stood in the silent chamber, bathed in the faint, ominous glow of the ancient signal, they knew that their shared journey had only just begun. The true war, the war for the survival of all life, was about to begin.